So this one, we're going to play around with UV mapping and texturing, kind of cover some of the basics here of different types of textures you might use, whether they're seamless textures, trim sheets, atlasing, high to low baking, that kind of fun stuff. And we'll save material blending for another video, but this one, you're going to get started with Affinity, and I'm just going to open a texture. I just want to talk about making things seamless real quick. So we'll go ahead and grab this, go to a new document. We'll do a 1K, so 1024 by 1024, right? Paste that in there, and let's go ahead and scale it appropriately to whatever we need. And now we'll rasterize and trim here in a Affinity photo. We'll do filters, distort, and affine. We'll do a 50-50 split. So this is usually how you would go about making something seamless. That's an image anyways. You would use clone stamp tool, use a brush of your liking. That's a little bit grungier perhaps. You can start to blend some things together, and take your time with this normally, but fly through it for this video. So, and try not to copy over seams or go off of edges and stuff like that. Okay, so very simple, easy process, and before you know it, we'll have a seamless texture, right? Now, it won't be a PBR texture. We'll talk about that here in a second. We're just going to focus on the diffuse side of things for the most part, but it's so easy to convert these using Substance Designer or other software like Instamat, for example. You can kind of turn them into a PBR material rather fast off of images like this anyways. Okay, and so you'll want to offset it one more time just in case you need to. Let's get out of that. No, it's auto levels. I guess we can't get out of that. All right. Yeah, but you'll want to offset it one more time. No, offset. At 50-50. Use the same numbers. It'll make more sense. And just if there's a little cross in the middle, just get rid of that. Okay. So we can save this out as a PNG, Control-Shift-S to export it. We'll say this is going to be metal or whatever. I think it's like a fiberglass with lichens and whatnot on it. So anyways, that's a seamless texture now, right? Pretty simple and easy to understand. Let's prep something else though real quick. So we'll do a new document. We'll do another 1024. All right. And so I have a few seamless textures I've already prepped. I'm just going to drag them over here, drop them into this document from my desktop. We'll do the one I just did. This is where it gets kind of fun. If we were to make these, you need the transform window first. So window transform. Make sure they're linked up like so, and that way they stay the same aspect ratio. But we could take these and we can make them whatever size we want, like say 256, right? So we can just convert all their sizes real quick to 256s. All right. Now we can pull these out. And if you don't have snapping on, you go to view snapping, turn it on. Pretty much the default setup here. So you see we can make things like that real quick. Now, what if we wanted a trim sheet in here as well? Well, we could do that. Let's open up new texture somewhere. And so you can find all kinds of textures out there. There's a pack called Texture Hunt. It's really good. If you want to do that, you can just find whatever kind of pictures inside of that package. You'll see that we can grab an image. Maybe we don't want to use this whole thing. Maybe we want to edit that out. You could use like healing brush tool, maybe alt click, alt shift or alt and control. Might be able to healing brush tool that out real quick. It's probably better to do a clone stamp and take your time with stuff like that. But if you really had to just rush it, this is a possibility. So sometimes when you're doing like preview materials, this might be something you do. All right, I'm going to copy this in this area. You got to make sure the layer is selected here in Affinity. You can press Control-C, copy. We'll go to a new document. We're going to use 1024, but remember these have to be powers of 2 for game textures usually, but they don't have to be squares. So we could do something like a 256 by 1024 perhaps. Now I paste that in here. You can see it was a really large image. We'll just bring it back down to size, something like that. And so the fun thing is that you can make trim sheets seamless as well in all directions, but you have to use geometry to support it, right? Meaning you'll have to use tiles basically to make this happen. But let's just do this for now. We'll rasterize and trim. We'll filter, distort, define another 50-50. We'll just quickly turn this into a seamless texture in this little area. And I'm just going to use healing brush tool. Try to run through this a little bit faster, perhaps. You can select different brushes as well if you need to. Just try not to create any overlaps with the seams there. That's the best thing you can do. Okay. I'll get through this relatively fast, hopefully. Maybe you don't need to do all that like that. It's just this area, perhaps. Definitely work this a lot more precise, smaller brushes and things like that. You see, if you use like a healing brush or a clone stamp right up to the border there, this is what causes that little crosshair in the middle. But this is the basic idea of getting a seamless texture going anyways, a diffuse texture at that. So right in the center, there could be a little cross in here somewhere. Sometimes it can be really hard to find or see. If you want, you could turn on like rulers, try to find the middle, things like that. But I think we'll be okay. I'm going to copy this. We'll go over to here and just paste it. So this is, we just see we made it a seamless texture, right? This is where things get fun. You'll notice that there's like a midpoint. And we can snap right up to that perhaps if we wanted to. You can see it fits right here in this bottom section as well. I'm going to actually leave it down here for a second. Okay. And so now what we can do is just save this out. We'll call this an atlas for now. It's something like an atlas anyways. You can think of an atlas just being a combination of different textures on a single texture sheet, right? But you can use trims on this. You can do high to low bakes on stuff like this as well, potentially. So it's really interesting. You can combo up pretty much everything you can imagine into like one texture. And we'll see how that plays out here in Blender. So we'll do this in 3.6. And we'll create a plane. Create new material. Surface image. Our base color, click the little icon, do an image texture, open it. We'll go find our seamless texture we made. We'll turn on texture over here. You can set studio to this one. It's really nice. So it's nice and bright. Okay, I'm going to duplicate that out with Shift D. We're going to create a new one. We're going to make that the Atlas one, right? Right there. So there we go. We got this going on. So a seamless texture, of course, if you used them already, you'll know that if we were to take this mesh into edit mode, go to the UV editor, we'll see something like this usually. And we can move these things around, of course. That's the mapping of the plane, right? And so, but if we expand it bigger over the 0 to 1 space, it'll become tiled like so. If we made it smaller, it'll just get larger. Okay. And so the trick with this one though, is that like if we were to take this geometry here and set, turn outline off, this is going to be distracting, but we'll turn it off. Okay. If we hit Shift D, and I'm using grid snapping for this. Oh, I'm actually using incremental. No, absolute grid snap. There it is. Okay. So if we just Shift D, duplicate it, hit, G, Y, hold control, do something like this, right? We can see we can make this a, doesn't look like it's very seamless right there, but anyways, we can use tiles this way, right? So it's pretty easy to understand this in general, that you can tile something like that if needed. But let's say we wanted this to double up or something. A lot of people ask me, how do you ensure that a trim sheet stays seamless with itself? Well, this is what you do. Powers of 2 work well. But you can say, like, if you were to take this and press S and 2, it's going to double it up by twice. All right, this should be now tiled twice. And so if we were to duplicate that out, it should still remain seamless. So like scaling things by 2, 4, 8, stuff like that tends to work well usually. All right, so that's how you can use a seamless texture. Very simple and straightforward. Now a trim sheet, on the other hand, we'll go with the trim here at the bottom first. Take this mesh into, see if we got it frozen up or whatever. Okay, that is not in the center. What did I do wrong there? Let's go back. It should be right there. Let's save that out real quick. We'll reload it. All right, we'll go to the material, open, just open it again. You saw it move. There you go. So when we go into edit mode with this one, if we had set that up that way, and we're using powers of 2 for our textures, you'll see I can do a loop cut. And then, so Control R, click, right click, Control R, click, right click, boom. It's kind of isolating this little area now. So I can press, select the face, press P, separate selection. I'm going to run through this kind of fast, unfortunately. We can do the same down here. We can delete those. And we might want to adjust this origin point. Put it into a corner. You can use machine tools for that. I'm going to show you a way to do it manually real quick. So this one right here, we can do a couple loop cuts real quick, get it all combined together like that, then press Y to start ripping these, right? Press A, P, separate by loose parts. Okay. So the manual ways of doing this is you go into edit mode, select the corner you want, hit Shift S, and then do cursor to selected. Right, so cursor to vertex in this case with machine tools. Go back to object mode. You can right click and set the origin to the 3D cursor. That's a manual way in Vanilla Blender anyways. And that would place it like so up there in the top corner basically. But machine tools, Shift S, hold Alt, 2 vert, bam, done. So what if you had a bunch of them you needed to do? You could maybe right click these and set origin to geometry. So they're all in the center. Hit Control period. Now you can maybe use grid snapping or increment or even vertex snapping. Hit G, hold Control, and you can push them all something like this. Remember, it does the nearest thing to your mouse, so you might want to start on this side here. And sometimes even that might fail, so it gets a little bit goofy. You might have to figure out how you're going to do this. All right, something like that. Control period. There you go. So all those are updated now. We can definitely grab these and hit like Control A, apply rotation scale, all that fun stuff, right? So we know how seamless textures work, and trim sheets are basically the same thing, except they work going out in this direction, right? And so they have to just be on the 0. You're on, you got to remember this is the x-axis, this is the y-axis. So while you're working in the UV editor, you can actually position things independently. So you can press like G and then hit Y, it'll go up and down, or X, right? And they have locations under image. You'll see that there's a X location 0. And we can find the exact positioning of these things basically, more or less. All right. But trim sheets are just like working with seamless textures. So if I took this and I was to press S, X, and 2 and doubled its setup here, you'll see we can actually pull it out, right? And it should remain seamless as long as we line these up correctly. Let me switch back to grid snapping. There you go. And yeah, we shouldn't see any major seam in there right now. Not doing that. All right. Now, it gets a little bit more fun. We made this as a seamless X and Y tile, right? So we can actually double these up like this as well, and it still stays seamless. Now we do get this nice white line through here, right? So a lot of times you have to create padding on these. Just a couple pixels will do usually, and to avoid those kinds of things. Now doing that manually, of course, isn't the most fun of things, but you could definitely grab this and hit like Control J to duplicate it here. When we scale, if we hold Control, you can see that happens. So we could do it like that, or we could type in a value here that's less and just make sure it's not on uniform scale, perhaps. But we'll do that like maybe once, and then maybe twice. You see, we can create kind of the bleed we need here for this. Unfortunately, though, that means when we're working with these kinds of textures, we have to keep that in mind. And when we're UV mapping these things, we also need to think about scaling these in a little bit on Y, right? Now, I didn't save that texture out, so let's do that real quick. Let's just go back and export it again. And we'll do that. Back in Blender. Oh, if it'll get it up open. If you go into the image viewer here, you can just hit Alt-R. Re-import it. I think you have to have no wrangler with that one, but otherwise you just open it again. All right, so now you can see, we got all those selected. It kind of blows out everything, unfortunately, when you have multiples selected like that. But if we just bring it in a little bit and kind of see where it starts, we could probably eyeball it. If we need to get exact placement of these things, Blender's kind of unique because it has, well, maybe it's not unique, but you can use a grid for snapping as guides or whatever, but you can also use a pixel grid. So you can snap to the pixels, basically. So when you use absolute grid snapping here, you could possibly do that, right? Okay, so, but regardless, we just adjust the UVs a little bit, and now you can see it is going to, in fact, behave for the most part the way we want, as long as we get it mapped well enough. You can see we definitely still have some seams in here. So let's try doing this by eye real quick and just see if we can't get it pretty much pixel perfect, maybe. See it starts stretching there. Okay. Pretty close. I feel like I'm still slightly off on this one. Yeah, we're looking for right when it transitions or changes there. Okay. Maybe like the pixel above it. And we should be pretty close to on the money here. You'll have to fiddle with this one a little bit sometimes. It could depend on like how it is filtered, the texture is filtered. For whatever reason, I'm having a really hard time getting that aligned, but I shouldn't be having this much trouble with it. It's usually easier than this. All right. Am I going too far or something? What's going on here? Should be like right there. All right. Anyway, so yeah, you'd have to fiddle with that one a little bit. From back here, you're not going to really see maybe that one pixel too much. It's not usually too bad. All right. It could be one of them that is off as well. Like the bottom could be off compared to the top. So you can always try, just shifting these independently, perhaps, if you need to. Right up to where it starts doing that thing where it looks like it's stepping. And right there. Let's see how that looks now. Very close. Very, very close. All right. Usually you can get it really close like that and it's not a big deal. All right. So here's the thing. We see how that works, right? These work the exact same way as that, more or less. And so, we can do some grid snapping and push them out. In our case here in Blender 3.6, we can hold Control and Shift while doing grid snapping. Blender 4 series, for whatever reason, they got rid of Shift or it's not working. And so I think 3.6 is still going to be a little bit better for now as far as like snapping modular pieces. But I imagine they're going to update that or fix it at some point. Somebody was saying in the comments when I pointed that out in another video that it's not true. Like it was still snapping. No, it's on when you're using increment in 4 series. This is its own thing. Grid snapping is its own thing. They work differently. So anyways, what we're looking at here is like all of these can do this. So if you're trying to build out like a modular environment, you want to make like multiple walls or whatever the case, right? You could potentially do that. No problems. And do whatever you got to do, right? Now, it's a real kind of pain to do all of that because what ends up happening is while it's extremely performance efficient, especially for things like mobile games, it's extremely, I think it's lengthy of a process to do this. And it's not that it's the most efficient way of working perhaps. And, you always got to do like little minor adjustments and stuff. So I'd venture a guess as well, if you're okay with this idea, you could grab something like that If you have the UV toolkit, which you can find in extensions section on Blender 4 series, you can probably just grab that and start to Alt-S it in a little bit. And at least it'll kind of knock that effect back a little bit, but you will get seams, right? They're very, very hard to see. So like if you're really in a rush, I guess, maybe you can get away with that. All right. So I wanted to go through this real quick, just explaining this to some of you guys, because you're having a hard time when you're thinking about doing high poly to low poly models and baking them and using trims and then comboing everything together. All right. It's all kind of the same idea. You know, tile sets like this, perhaps, seamless textures are all basically the same ideas. Now, the reason I wanted to point this out the most is because when you're going to start creating high polys and baking them to low polys, you could think like, you know, if you're doing something like this, and let's put the cursor over here, we're going to create like a trim sheet or something. Okay. And let me go ahead and just push that up there. Maybe we have this tapered in slightly. And beveled. We'll shade it auto smooth for now. And let me get the GrabDoc add-on going real quick. GrabDoc's another free add-on you can get in extensions. You can go ahead and set this thing up. This is a little bit of an older version, but I'm going to remove leave cam on the exit. I think they got rid of that one. But nonetheless, we can set this thing up, right? And usually it goes to the center of the scene. Okay. And so sometimes you might want that, sometimes you might not. It's a little bit of a tricky add-on. You can actually make it selectable. You can get all these things down here. They should be kind of locked. And so if we go to the little lock section, a little arrow, you'll see this is all locked up, right? Should be able to unlock it so it's selectable now. Okay, it's just a little tricky. You want to grab everything in here, hold shift and select it all. You can actually move this to where you need it. It's just a camera. And what we'll see is that when we move it, as long as we kept it flat, didn't move it up and down, we should still be able to do something like a normal preview, right? And boom, just like that. Okay, so you can create all kinds of cool things with GrabDoc. It's not just about creating normal maps. You can do albedos, base colors, basically. You can do material IDs, like random material IDs, which is really awesome. So if you want to create trim sheet seamless textures, super cool add-on. For this, you can create height maps too, alphas and sculpting alphas, all kinds of fun stuff. Now, this is a camera projection, right? It's going to project from a camera way up here that's an orthographic camera straight down onto this plane, and that's how that works out anyways. And that's what's going on here with this. But if we were doing like a model that was going from Blender into Substance Painter, and we still wanted to have similar kind of behaviors here, basically this would be like your high poly model, and a plane for this area could be possibly your low poly model. So it looks quite a bit different. So if I was just to turn GrabDoc off for a second, what might end up happening is you'll bake a high poly to a low poly that looks something like this, right? And this is where it gets a little bit tricky for some of you, because you can do this and you can project it straight back down onto that plane from the high to the low. But the trick is that the UV map is the most important thing now. So when we go to the UV editor, we don't want a UV map like this. We want to unwrap and have something like this. This is where your add-ons come into play, like text tools or UV toolkit. A lot of times you need to make sure these are like pointed in the right directions. And if I just rotate and hold control, so it snaps like so, maybe we want it to have left to right, fully crossing this. Text tools is great for this. You turn the padding off because we're going to hit crop. But if you don't turn padding off, you get, well, padding. So turn padding off. Now you can crop, and you can use the canvas, okay, to go ahead and do something like align this to the center. Oop, and you want to do it by island usually. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4. Select the island and center it, or to the top or the bottom. And this is where you can start using the pixel grid perhaps as well, or custom grid. So you can do like fixed. And you can change these so that it matches the kind of trim sheet setup that you might want, or whatever the case. And you can turn on like absolute grid snapping and do the whole 9 yards here, basically. 10 actually works out really well, by the way. So this might be one you want to utilize, but you can see we can actually lay this out exactly where we need it. So when we bake this, it will become a seamless texture. Okay. Like that's the main idea. And just to prove a point here, what I'm going to do is we're going to bake this to a texture real quick. So the low poly model here, or the low poly plane that we created, I'm going to give it a new material. We'll just call it the bake material for now. I wouldn't recommend baking here in Blender, but usually you can get away with this for stuff like this. GrabDoc's better though. Anyways, it's set up correctly for this. Now, only thing is that we need, under shading, we need to create a texture, image texture. What we'll do is we'll create a new texture. We're going to make this a 32-bit float. Usually you use this for height maps, normal maps, right? That's kind of what you would do. We'll just call it bake for now. And we'll call it a 32, 1024. Okay. You can see we can do that. All right. We just need to make sure this is selected. We go to the baker, switch to cycles. This is simple bake. We're not using that right now. So we'll do the default baker. But if we wanted to do a normal, we can do a normal. Bake selected to active. So this to this. So we got to select both. Hold shift, select the low second, select this. And so there's a little bit more to this. Like every time you do a bake, it'll clear the image. If you want to turn that off, you can just keep piling information into a bake. But for the most part, I think we're good with this one right now. Oh, don't bake for multi-res, sorry. We don't do that one. Selected to active. And you can use cages as well. So if you want to direct a low poly, right, with a cage, it would be basically a duplicate of the low poly and usually triangulated as well. And you would bake to that, or you would use that as your cage anyways. I've done videos on cages, so we're not going to mess with that one here in this one. We're going to do selected active. We're just going to use extrusion. And right now, because all these vertex normals are just pointed straight up, the extrusion will work fine. I could set this to something like 0.5 perhaps, or maybe 1. Ray distance at 0 is infinite. If you want to limit the effect of a ray distance, you type in a value that's usually similar to extrusion, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, who knows. But anyways, we set it up like this. You got to make sure this is selected before we hit bake. We're just going to bake now. Okay. And you can see it bakes exactly where it needs to go according to our UV. That's what controls these kind of bakes like this. It's our low poly UVs that control where things show up. The high poly information is just sent to that part of the UV. So a lot of you guys that are struggling, like you want to create trim sheets, you know, a lot of times you have to do things like this perhaps. But at any given point in time, you could sculpt seamless textures, for example. You can sculpt trim sheets, or you can take this and like, you can sculpt on it a little bit if you wanted to add a little bit of like breakup to it, because it's just a high poly at this point, right? So we hit tab, control tab, go into sculpt mode, hit R, bump up the resolution, control R. You see, it's not going to be the prettiest remesh here. Let's make that a little bit higher, not that much. Okay. And so you can see, we can do all kinds of fun stuff like this, basically. If we want to have a little bit more control in sculpt mode, before you do the remesh, initialize face sets by normals. You can get something like that going, okay? So now when we remesh it, when we have this, we can use other tools. If I can pull out my tools here by hitting T. Not trying to remesh it again right now. You use like mesh filter, set it to smooth. Use face sets, face set boundaries as masks. And that way we can click and drag. We can start to smooth that out there on that edge. Okay. And then later on, we can use whatever tools we find useful, whether it's the scraper or whatever the case. You'll see if we scrape up to the corner, it doesn't do nothing. So we might turn off face set boundaries and work only in face sets for a bit, or maybe turn face sets off too. And we can like scrape down this corner. We can start to do like edge wear damages, maybe like make little individual bricks and spice them up a little bit, doing things like this. So this is, you know, baking high polys and low polys one-on-one basically. We click on that, click on, see if we can get a hold of these again. Make sure I can get a hold of it. All right, where did this model go? Is it still there? It is. Okay. Somehow it ended up with texture applied to it. I guess it's just going to show up because I have texture set right now. So we can go back to material if we want. But whatever the case, it's still set up. We just have to reselect this bake, rebake it. It should show the updates here now. We'll have a normal map like so, right? So keep in mind, there's all kinds of cool things you can do with Blender as far as like creating textures and materials. But like if we had a detail later on that we wanted to bake as well, and we were just modeling some kind of thing here, something like this. Hit C to clamp, AM, merge by distance. Some low poly model perhaps. And it does a number like this, but we wanted to maybe duplicate it later on. / to isolate, go into sculpt mode, initialize your face sets. So we want to create a high poly. We can tweak the numbers here and hold shift while doing this. You can usually get a decent breakout, something like that. Sometimes you got to go back with the face set tool and readjust it. But yeah, we could work this out into a high poly as well, as much as we need to. If we want to sculpt on it like that, we could. Use mesh filters. And yeah, there's a lot of dancing around with the settings, but it's doable for the most part. Face set boundaries, face sets, set to smooth. All right, so we can work that one out a little bit, perhaps. Shade smooth. Maybe smooth the whole model as well. And add any additional detail if you need to, but we'll keep it simple for now. And so let's say we do, no, let's not do that. Let's just do 22 iterations maybe. Just make it a little bit rounder and softer. Yeah, okay. Shade it smooth. Make sure it's all good to go. This is the low poly here. Shade it auto smooth, and we're just going to smart UV project this real quick. Use smart UV project. It's usually the wrong answer because it breaks it up sometimes too much. And actually, you know what? It looks terrible. Let's not do that for now. Let's just go through here and use the UV toolkit add-on to start marking some seams with Shift F using the pie menu that comes with it. You can do border seams, which is quite useful. But any sharp edge right now needs a seam. So when you're doing high to low poly bakes, any sharp edge gets a seam, right? Otherwise, you'll have some really nasty stuff that happens. And you also have to use a cage, which we're not going to do in this one. So we'll still have a subpar result. But that's usually your problem. You don't use a cage. And so we can see here, this is now going like so, right? I really should name these. So we'll say this is object underscore low. And then the other one will be object underscore high. Okay. That's just so I can identify them a little easier. You can make your selection off a list, of course. Right. And so we already baked the one, right? Where we did. Let's go to the shading tab real quick. Already baked this one right here. And it erased it. Oh, you see that? You have to save these or it will lose them. It's kind of bizarre like that sometimes. It's very, very bizarre sometimes. And sometimes you have a hard time even selecting these things. So we'll say trim underscore high. And we can get a hold of that other model. Maybe. There we go. Alt Z it, I guess. And we'll name that trim underscore low. We're going to rebake that just real quick, like control click here, make sure it's active, select, bake. Okay. You can see it updates. We're not going to clear the image now. What we have to do is take this model here. Let's pull that down for a sec. We want the low. We need to unwrap this. I didn't do that yet. Press U and unwrap. Go to the UV editor. Okay. Little things like this you don't want to do as well. You want to straighten these kinds of things out, like rectify them. Okay. And some of them like this, we could try rectifying as well if we put some more seams in it, but I think we'll be okay for now. What I want to do is I want to pack this, okay? I'm going to use Pack Master and just pack it real quick. I want a little bit more margin than that. So a little bit more spacing between these. You can try to use heuristics and advanced heuristics. It's just giving us a so-so result. Not the greatest of results, but we can still utilize it. So this low, if I can get a hold of it again, hide that for a second. And this low, pick them both into edit mode. You see what's going on here? They're kind of all over each other. We can isolate these a little bit better if we just move one for a second. But into edit mode with both of them. Maybe we want this somewhere else. And we can adjust, average the island scale here. We have to kind of do this manually now. So there's little display modes to display stretch. But if you set it to area, you can see they're not kind of in unison with each other. If you scale them similar, they'll have like the same blue color, right? That's what'll happen. So now our UVs would be basically the same scale or size, which is great. And so now we can go ahead and Alt-H, unhide everything else. We have two objects. So we got high, low, then we have high and low. We'll make this one the active element. Okay. And if we try to bake like this, it's not going to work here in Blender. It doesn't know that these two elements should be the same. We'd have to actually join the mesh possibly. But the way I wanted to do this, I wanted to show that you can bake one first. And then if we only focus on this one, doing high to low, it's using the same, it should be using the same material, okay? The bake material, so we can select this. And if we don't clear, you know, so select it to active, but if we don't clear the image, it'll add to this. So we can just click bake again. And it should just update here with additional information now, right? It'll do that number. Okay. And so you can combo like a trim sheet with a unique one-to-one bake basically, but you could do like little tile sets as well. You know, if you wanted to make a little tile in here, maybe you're doing like a cylinder later on, right? Like you're doing like a hose and you just need a seamless texture across the hose. You can literally do stuff like this all day long where you play around with these ideas when setting up your high polys. Now, so let me just talk about that real quick. If this was a high poly, this was a high poly, and we had like a combined low poly later on, which was like part trim sheet, this piece, and then the low poly mesh here, we can bake that in Substance Painter, guys. Like this would potentially work in Substance Painter as long as we're combining things if needed and triangulating and create cages and whatever else we might have to do. But in the case of like a cylinder, let's delete the top and bottom here. So we're creating like a hose or something like that, and we need a seamless texture. That's going to be something like this. We'll just add a seam. Go to the UV editor and unwrap it. And then now you can position it how you need to, use text tools. You can crop it, center it, do all that fun stuff, right? Place it where you need, or just make it a little atlas piece by itself. You know, it doesn't have to be end to end like that. All right. But if this model was repeated and we had a high poly and low poly right here, like we were just doing, we might need another high poly and low poly on each end so we can bake it appropriately, so we don't get like ambient occlusion that doesn't work right. But once we do that and we go into edit mode here, you'll see we have like UV overlaps. Basically, it's like they all have their own UVs, but they're all in the same area. A lot of times you need to take these UVs, you can press L and select by UV, L, and you can press GX1 and you can offset them by 1. And so when you bake in Substance, this works really good. Now the thing is that once you do this, you take this model into Substance, you bake it. When you're trying to paint on your model in Substance, you won't be able to paint on these UVs. Okay. So your parts of your model will feel dead. So what you do is you replace your file after you bake. You do GX-1 again. You can also export one out like this, so you can paint all over your model whenever you want. It doesn't matter. And so you can just change your low poly project model after you bake, basically, and then you just have fun texture, right? It's a little bit tricky, but I just wanted to point this all out that you can do stuff like this. So if we were to just do very quickly, let's just give this a new material, create a new texture, image texture. And let's just do new. I'm going to make this a 32-bit float too, but for base colors, normally you wouldn't use 32-bit float. We'll just call it new and 1024. And we might want to make this linear or non-color. It's up to you. If you're going to create height maps, normal maps, linear and non-color is the way to go. Base color is sRGB, obviously, or just whatever else, right? That you choose to use here. These are color spaces. And so that's for another video. We're not talking about color spaces a whole lot here. But anyways, we can hook this up to base color for now. I just want to join these meshes, right? Make sure they're all good to go. They're all UV mapped here on this new texture. And so if I was to go ahead and hit Control Tab, go to texture space or texture paint, and bring out the side panel. No, we need the properties panel here. You can see we're painting on a material right now. We could just do a single image if we wanted to and say we wanted to paint on new, right? We can make it white or red. Or let's just use white for now. And so what we'll see is that we paint on one, it paints on the others right now. So this same behavior takes place in Substance Painter is what I'm getting at. So we can texture across all of them, like wherever the seam might be. So the seam's here, right? Somewhere around, nope, right there. Okay, it's hard to tell sometimes. But yeah, we could paint right there if we wanted to, right? So that's just something good to know. Let's put a couple dots in here or something like that. And it's going to be a seamless texture. And it should create a little bit of bleed, I think. Yeah, it looks like it does, doesn't it? It's kind of interesting. Anyways, so what do you use these things for? Well, let's go back to shading real quick. We had it hooked up to base color, but we could run this into something like a vector bump node here in Blender. Change it to height, or set it into height and set it into normal. It's going to turn it into a normal map, more or less. Control right click to get rid of that. Z material preview. Yeah. So this is literally when guys are talking about they're creating hand-painted normal maps. They're creating hand-painted height maps usually, and they're converting them into normal maps. It's usually what they're doing. So, you know, if you're a material preview and you're using black and white, you can hit Shift F, texture paint. You can literally do this all day long. The same kind of stuff you would do in Substance anyways, with heights over there perhaps. And so you can do this, you can smudge them. If you want to have a go at this, you could do this. You could also do like bevel bakes and combo your normal maps together. Krita has an excellent little way of mixing them. Blender is a little bit more complicated to mix, I think. You have to do some actual math for it. But yeah, you can make your own kind of setups like this. But once again, the same height map you would use to create a normal map could also be a displacement map. So let's just play around with that idea real quick. These models here are this. It's very narrow, so it's kind of hard to see this thing. All right, tilde key, you select that. I messed that up. Let's just add some loop cuts in here. So we have more density. All right. And what this will allow us to do now is we can go ahead and add a subdivision. We could do a smoothing subdivision or simple. It's up to you and what your model might need, but we can bump up the viewport amount basically a little bit. Turn off optimal display if you want. You're trying to create squares, not rectangles, but we'll go with rectangles for now anyways. Right click, shade it smooth. Okay. And you can see for the most part what's going on here. You can also bump the strength around on that normal map if needed. But we're not going to use that. We're going to get rid of it. Let's just make this metallic real quick to see things a little bit better perhaps. All right. And so now we should be able to add a displacement modifier. Now displacement's a little bit weird in Blender. You have to create a new texture thing here and then go to the texture panel. And you have to open up what you want to create. In our case, it was our texture we were working on. So we can just open that up. And you can see we can save this or discard it. And so if we click save, it's going to save it out wherever. 16-bit in this case, PNG should be fine. Compression doesn't really matter, just non-color. Save it out. If you want to save it, back over here, instead of using local, we can use the UV coordinates. So it's a little bit of a process. You can see that just went crazy. Strength is just way too high right now, basically. So yeah, we can change the strength. Mid-level on the black background would probably be a 0. All right. So it'll either push out or pull in, but you don't usually want the base level changing. So black would be a 0. If you're using mid-gray, like where it can push in and out at the same time, then you would end up doing 0.5s usually. All right, but you can see we can in fact create displacement maps this way. And that's what's really cool about it. I mean, we're just texture painting at the end of the day, right? Like we can go on here, go back to our settings. And we should be able to continue texture painting unless the save messed that up somehow, which it looks like it might have. No, we have smudge on right now. That's what it is. Turn that up a bit. Okay. You see, it does actually paint on it, but it's a little bit delayed. Okay. It's a little bit weird trying to do that. If you hold shift, I think it smooths it as well. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit delayed. It's a little bit unfortunate. I think it used to be more responsive and more real-time like. But if you press Z, go to solid view, and if you had texture on, a lot of times you can still see this. Well, in texture paint, you should still see it as well. But yeah, you can just paint on it a little bit, try to figure out what you're trying to create and do. And this is fun, right? Like we can do this all day long. We can smooth things possibly as well. If not, use a blur tool. And maybe just blur things like that. All right, so not just normal maps, not just creating tile sets and trims. It's all kind of connected together in a way. And so this is where a lot of guys, I think, they just don't fully understand what's possible. Because, I mean, you make something like this, and later on, after you make this whole setup, I should be able to save it again over here if I want. Remember where that scene was. I don't remember where it was. So let's press L and select by the scene, right? Or the UVs, one or the other. So you could do UVs, for example. Same, it'll give you the same result, but we can delete all that. Maybe this little piece here, we want to lay it out on a curve later on. Put the origin to the center, apply rotation and scale real quick. So Control A, apply rotation and scale. Now we can do like a curve. And we'll do a Bezier curve. Pull that out, rotate it. We'll make it a little bit larger because that's a pretty big piece. And you can see it's pretty dense too. So let's just turn subdivision off for a second and the displacement while we set this up initially, because we're going to have to add some things to this. So first we want it on the curve. Let's do that. So we add a curve, we pick the curve, boom. It's going to line up to it. It may not be correct yet. We could try X, Y, or Z's on these usually. But the main thing is why it doesn't line up is the origin point of the curve's over here. The origin point of this object's over here, right? That's not what we want, okay? So I'm going to grab this curve, Shift S, and then do, oh, you know what? Actually, Shift S on this, do cursor to selected. We're going to grab this and we're going to do selection to cursor, okay? That'll get us in a better starting position now. So they align it with machine tools. This should align to rotation, but otherwise, I'm going to make sure that they have the same scale and the same rotation as well. Super important. If not, Control A, apply things as needed. And so you can see now we could probably line this up very easily on Z. There you go. We're going to push that to the top. We'll do an array. We're going to push that to the top too. Either the curve or the array goes one or the other. But I forgot which one it is, so we'll try both. Okay, so we'll do one here, and we can jump the iterations up. Or we could set it to curve, fit curve, pick the curve, boom. All right, and it's going to usually overextend in ways you don't want it to. That's just kind of what it does. But anyways, so yeah, array curve, and then we have these. You can see we can do all that later on, perhaps. Very simple of an idea. So that curve, hard to get a hold of it again, okay? You could try in solid view, you can hit Alt Z and usually get a hold of it. But sometimes you want this curve to stay in front of everything. So you go to viewport display and change it to in front. So you don't have that big of a problem anymore. Hopefully it just won't be that big of a deal. You can just select it, right? But now if you were to ever change the curve, you move it around, you'll see it's updating. You can see it gets kind of slow with the subdivision on it, but maybe we can bump down the subdivision to a preview size for now. And for when it renders, we maybe do higher. All right. Right. So this is the main idea that I'm trying to drive home in this video, is that all of this stuff is kind of interconnected. Like you can literally pretty much make anything you want happen. You know, making high to low is almost no different than working with regular trim sheets or textures. You just have to think about it a little bit methodically, perhaps a little bit carefully. I'll save sculpting seamless for another video. I have to try it out in the newer versions of Blender. In 3.6, it wasn't working too well. And so, but previous versions, it was working okay. So I don't know what happened in 3.6, but the when you sculpt in Blender, it tends to lose like symmetry in tiling positions. So your things can become not tiling necessarily. You'll have like mismatches. And so it's a little tricky inside of Blender to work with that. Some tools will be worse than others. It's a little tedious process. So, but nonetheless, anyways, so that's the main idea of this whole video, is just to kind of get you know, up and going on this kind of idea. It's very, very possible. So it would render like this, right? It's very possible to do this, to create like ropes or very complex looking mechanical wires and cables and whatever else. But you can texture them not just with a height map. I mean, it could be base color, roughness, metallic. You know, when you do that in Substance, that's what ends up happening, right? Anyway, so yeah, that's the whole process there for the most part. If you want to just scale these uniformly, you probably could get away with it. Oh, maybe not. Not with that that curve doing that apparently, right? So if you scale it, you might be able to press Control A and apply scale. It might help it out a little bit. Who knows? All right. More than likely, you would just set up the array yourself, not using the curve setting. A lot of people have issues with that one, I think, but it could be useful to you. Who knows? Anyways, yeah, so that's pretty much the whole idea here, is what we're doing. Or what I was trying to explain to you guys anyways. It's just how you can work with this stuff, right? It's not like, it can be kind of complicated. It takes a while to learn how to do. But once you understand it, I mean, you're able to just really go to town with it and have fun. I mean, it's one of those things, right? Like, it's most things when you're learning it in Blender, it's slow at first. As you learn more, it speeds up, and you don't really have as many issues with it as you run through that process a couple dozen times or more. You start to understand all these little nuanced things, and it even helps even more when somebody shows you something like this, right? Nobody really showed me a whole lot of this, so I had to pick up little tidbits of information, experiment a lot, and well, hopefully it helps you out anyways. And if it does, you know, leave a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and I'll check you out in the next video. All right, so take care.